Welcome to Changemaker Q&A, a show brought to you by the School of Social Impact. This is where we dive into the real questions changemakers like you are asking, from tackling inequality to rethinking sustainability and everything in between. If you'd like to be part of the conversation, join our Q&A community group inside the School of Social Impact. There, you can post your own questions, connect with others creating change, and even see your questions featured in a future episode. Head to the School of Social Impact to join us, and let's start answering the questions that move us all forward. Welcome back to Changemaker Q&A, everybody. I'm excited to dive into today's topic. I'm going to be going through a really useful framework to help the way we think about the topic of philanthropy. And philanthropy is one of those big kind of elusive beasts for many of us that work in the social change space. And I think for a very long time, funding has always been seen as like the be all and end all of how much impact an organization or a group can have. For a very long time, it has felt like our potential to drive change and create impact has been constrained or enabled by the amount of funding that we have access to. And that is still largely how things operate in a capitalist economy. But I think for a lot of organizations, and particularly grassroots organizations over the last decade or two, I've observed that we tend to be really limited by the way in which we frame funding as like the most important driver of change or the thing that allows us to do the work that we do. And I think that's a larger conversation that we could have in terms of how this budget first mentality that we often go into our projects or interventions has. There's so much to say about looking at a problem and saying, how much money do we have to solve this problem, compared to the approach that I would advocate taking, which is, let's look at a problem. Let's look at all of the possible outcomes or new changes that we could work to bring about. And then we'll worry about which ones we can actually afford and how we might actually operationalize that. But I do think that allowing a budget and finance to be the framing through which we look at a lot of problems and the way we do the work within our organizations is an outdated approach and something that definitely needs to change. But today's conversation is more of a conversation about the changing landscape of philanthropy and how we can think about the ways that we might engage with large organizations, or if we are a part of organizations, how we might think about the ways in which we engage and receive support from people. When a lot of us think about philanthropy, we probably think about that traditional characterization of like really large endowments or big charitable trusts. But the landscape of philanthropy in Australia and globally is something that is currently changing and evolving. And this is being driven by a lot of things. It's been driven by the intergenerational wealth transfer that we're seeing, changes in technology and technological advancement, and new models of engagement. So what are we talking about when we talk about this kind of intergenerational wealth transfer? The projected transfer of wealth from the baby boomer generation to millennials and Gen Z represents one of the most significant shifts in philanthropic potential in modern history. So here in Australia, estimates suggest that over $3.5 trillion will pass between generations over the next 20 years. And this wealth transfer is going to completely redefine the philanthropic landscape as younger generations bring different values and priorities and approaches to giving. Younger donors tend to prioritize things like social justice, climate change, equity, and this kind of reflection of their awareness of global challenges. Unlike their predecessors, who were probably more inclined to support traditional institutions, so universities, hospitals, art galleries, museums, things like that. Millennials and Gen Z in particular favor a lot more direct impact initiatives, different grassroots movements, and more innovative solutions. And these generations are also more likely to view philanthropy as a collaborative endeavor and something that we do together, seeking partnerships with organizations that are really going to align with their own personal values. There are also larger trends globally that are shaping modern philanthropy. So a big one of these is technological innovation. In the digital era, we have seen a complete democratization of philanthropy. Donors can now directly give to causes and organizations through online platforms. This was not something that was possible previously. And now we see the rise of crowdfunding sites, so things like GoFundMe, Chuffed, that allow individuals to contribute to very specific campaigns with immediacy and more transparency. Looking to the future, I think there is the potential for things like blockchain technology to also enhance accountability and trust when it comes to donating and philanthropic giving, ensure that donations reach their targeted beneficiaries. We're also seeing the rise of impact investing in sustainable philanthropy. So younger generations are increasingly more inclined to want to blend philanthropy with investment through approaches like impact investing, where your financial returns are going to be combined with measurable, scalable social impact or environmental outcomes. We see the rise of ethical investment funds and social enterprises as donors are really seeking to align their own personal wealth with their values. Where previously the mindset or the mentality was like, generate as much wealth as you can, then give what's left over to those in need. This new approach is looking at how can I generate wealth for myself and my community in a way that is also supportive of those in need or other environmental and social outcomes that we want to see. I think the focus of DEI is also reshaping philanthropic priorities. Historically, marginalized communities are gaining really increased recognition as these essential stakeholders in both defining and addressing social challenges. Philanthropic organizations are being called upon to amplify diverse voices and redirect their resources to underserved communities and really embed equity in their practices and their strategies. So there are a lot of different challenges and opportunities when it comes to the changing landscape of philanthropy. But what I wanted to talk about today was the 5 T's of philanthropy. This is something that I learnt when I was doing a fellowship last year with Fundraise for Australia. And it's a framework that kind of helps us to understand the different ways that we can engage with philanthropic giving. Philanthropy no longer has to be confined to or restrained by what we can financially give. But there are these 5 T's that kind of describe the different ways that we can engage with and give to organizations in a philanthropic way. So the first of these 5 T's, and one that I think is the one that I would warrant a guess that most of our audience has probably engaged with through in some capacity, is time. And this can really be summarized as something like volunteering. Financial giving definitely still remains as the aspect of philanthropy that dominates public discourse, but the contribution of time through something like volunteering probably remains one of the most transformative and perhaps underappreciated drivers of organizational-led social change. Volunteering isn't just a supplement to what organizations are doing. Volunteering is something that can reshape the culture, build the capacity, and foster innovation within organizations. Now, we have an upcoming episode all about volunteering, and I had a chat with Karen Knight, who is a consultant who works with organizations to help them build strategies to meaningfully engage volunteers in their organizations. So keep an eye out if that's something that you're interested in, because it was a very insightful conversation. And there's so much to be said about volunteering. But I think what I wanted to touch on here is just the role that volunteering plays and how it is arguably just as important as donating funds. Time as a form of philanthropy is expanding the capacity of an organization. When you give your time, you're essentially taking on a role or doing something that either wouldn't be done without you being there, or in order for it to be done, it would need to be paid for. And depending on how much money the organization has access to, they might not be able to afford to do it as well as you could do it. They might not be able to do it at the same scale as having volunteers doing it, or they might not be able to do it at all. So you're essentially doing the work that keeps the organization moving forward and getting things done, which is super important. And there are different types of volunteering. You can be a skilled volunteer where you're going in and specifically sharing your own expertise with this organization, or you can engage in a less skilled way where you're there and conducting certain activities. You're helping with the operations of that organization. And so when individuals engage with an organization, they're bringing in their own perspectives, their own lived experience, their own insights that can also shape the way work is done and the overall culture of an organization. And this is particularly important for those larger organizations where things tend to move very slowly and they might be operating. Volunteers are also not bound by the same kind of institutional constraints as staff within organizations are, and this can often allow them to approach different challenges with more creativity and flexibility. As a personal example, I used to volunteer for Amnesty International, and I was on the media and comms team, and I wasn't a staff member. I was working with a team of volunteers, and we were the ones that were executing all of the social media for Amnesty in different regions of Australia and for local action groups as well. And we weren't bound by the same rules or the same duties that the paid staff members had to do. And so we had a lot more flexibility to really get out there and create like grassroots level content that would drive engagement with the organization. And a great example is the Activist Connect podcast. So we were like the first ones to trial an experiment with an Amnesty International Australia podcast. And it was so much fun. We got to talk to so many cool activists, people within the organization, and we got to share that with the Amnesty International Australia community. And it was like a really great experiment in potential ways of innovating for how we communicate as activists within this organization. And we wouldn't have been able to do that if we were staff members, because we would have had all of these other jobs and things that we were focused on doing. Obviously, I'm no longer involved in that capacity with Amnesty, and so I don't work on the podcast, but Amnesty now has like a new podcast, and they were able to take the learnings and the things that we were able to do and carry that forward in their work. So there's lots of things that volunteers can do or get away with that staff members just don't have the capacity to. They don't have that same level of freedom to innovate and adapt as you might as a volunteer. For certain types of organizations, I think something else that is really valuable about volunteering with your time is that it allows you to connect with the community or the people that they're serving. A lot of staff members or people who have specific types of expertise, the work that they are doing tends to be more of like the office-based stuff. It's the strategy, it's the program development, it's the legal, it's the accounting, it's all of that stuff that an organization needs to function and operate properly. But you have the added benefit of being on the ground and being able to connect with the community members. And you almost become like a face of that organization in a way. So there's a lot of value and also a lot of rewards to engaging in philanthropy by giving your time. The second T is talent. And this kind of links on to time. Talent is essentially the ways in which we share our skills or our expertise in order to play a really transformative role in shaping organizational social change. Unlike things like our financial support, which might sustain programs and infrastructure, or something like time, which is expanding the capacity of the organization to operate and to do its work, what talent does is it's directly embedding your specialized knowledge or your capabilities into an organization, and therefore enhancing the organization's overall ability to innovate, adapt, and achieve more systemic impact. So we can think of talent as a really strategic resource, right? When people contribute their expertise, whether that is finance, expertise in law, technology, marketing, governance, whatever it might be, we're providing organizations with access to a really key resource that they otherwise wouldn't have had access to, or it would have been really costly. And this is particularly important for not-for-profit organizations that are often operating under a lot of financial constraints. Skilled volunteers is what we're talking about here. Pro bono professionals, people who engage as contractors, maybe at a discounted rate, whatever it might be, are helping organizations to strengthen their strategic planning, improve their operational systems, adopt new technologies, whatever it might be. And in doing so, they are reducing a lot of inefficiencies that can enable mission-driven work to be carried out more effectively. The sharing of talent in this context is not merely a transfer of like skills. This skill was now mine, now it's here in the organization. What we're really doing is we're introducing new frameworks, we're introducing new approaches and new kind of like standard operating procedures in a way that can expose staff or other volunteers to industry standards and facilitate the exchange of knowledge over time. The impact of talent is really important for sustainability in an organization. Unlike a one-off financial contribution, the transfer of skills or someone's knowledge and expertise is something that can have really enduring effects. An example that I can see playing out at the moment is in an organization that I am a part of. We are in this like transition period from our previous founder or the co-founders to working in more of a model of sociocracy. And leading this kind of transition is one particular person on the board, and she has such a wide knowledge, like such deep knowledge and experience in governance and like organizational strategy. And without her and like her expertise, I do not know how the organization would do it. We would be struggling so much. She is like so crucial. And when she is no longer either engaged with this organization or engaged in the same capacity that she is now, the impacts of her work that she's done and the things that she will leave behind is going to shape the direction of the organization for like the next 10 years. The governance documents that she is creating, the handbook, and all of the practical tools that she is creating from all of these governance documents are going to be the thing that shapes the way the organization operates for the next decade. And so when somebody offers their talent, their skills, their expertise to an organization, it's more than just a transactional thing. It has really long-lasting, wide-reaching impacts. So this is definitely one of the 5 T's of philanthropy that I think we shouldn't be overlooking. The third T of philanthropy is ties. This one always makes me think of something that my mum says. My mum has always said this. She always says, Tiana, it's not what you know in life, it's who you know. And I used to hate it when she would say that when I was a kid. But the older I get, the more I realize it is true. And it really emphasizes the importance of networking and building strong networks. So many of the opportunities that we get just in our own personal lives often related to the connections that we can make. And social impact in large organizations is no different. Ties, the building of relationships, the building of networks, the building of connections in our organizations that play a really powerful role in driving social change. Relationships are not peripheral to philanthropic practice. I know that we think in our heads that money is at the center of philanthropy, but ties create pathways for money and skills and all of these other resources to really flow. They are the foundation as well through which trust is established with a community. Like I said, resources are mobilized and collective action becomes possible. And so for organizations, the cultivation of strong and diverse ties is going to be not only a matter of survival for them, but a huge catalyst for transformation. I think at their core, ties, as like the third T of philanthropy, really relates to this notion of social capital. By cultivating relationships, organizations can gain access to networks of influence, collaboration, and support. These connections can take many forms. They can be partnerships with other nonprofits. They can be alliances with different corporate actors, collaborations with different government agencies, relationships with members of the local community. Every single tie is what is going to extend the reach of the organization and kind of embed it into the system that it's a part of. And in turn, these ties offer new pathways or opportunities for funding, for advocacy, for shared learning. And so the strength of an organization's ties really determine not only the breadth of the organization, but also how well it can sustain itself over time. Relationships are really central as well to building trust and legitimacy. Organizations that can foster strong ties with communities are going to be more likely to design programs that actually reflect the needs of those community members. Equally, having really strong ties with all of those kind of external stakeholders, the people like donors, policymakers, industry leaders, are going to confer your credibility. They're going to make it easier for you to advocate change and get what you want as an organization. And so this is a very relational dimension of philanthropy, but it really underscores the fact that social change is not achieved through resources alone. It's through the trust that enables these resources to be effectively applied out in the community. It's also important, I think, for us to note, and this is something that we're becoming like a lot more aware of in the mainstream, that social problems are complex and they're never going to be solved by a single actor. And so strong ties can facilitate more collaboration and allow organizations that might be working to serve the same community or address the same problem, but in different ways, to come together, share their resources, share their experience, coordinate their strategies, and have a really collective approach to their impact. The fourth T of philanthropy is testimony. Testimony is something that is, I think, probably the least visible, but also one of these kind of key drivers of change. And this is the ability to share stories, experience, and lived realities that kind of stands as a really key potential driver of social change. Storytelling is not just a communication tool. It is the thing that will shape the identity of an organization, build their legitimacy, mobilize people to support them, and frame narratives that can help expand their reach and their impact. At its core, testimony is allowing organizations to really be authentic. When individuals, whether they are beneficiaries, volunteers, staff, people in the community, share their stories, you're giving a human face to an organization's mission. And this is what's going to build trust with stakeholders. It's going to help audiences to understand not only what the organization does, but why it matters. And it can also situate these abstract goals that the organization might have in lived experience. It offers legitimacy that financial reports and performance metrics just can't achieve on their own. A really important example of this, to bring it back to the example of Amnesty International. I remember having a conversation with someone many years ago. I think I had just started volunteering with Amnesty, and somebody had told me they used to donate to Amnesty, but they stopped when they found out that the people that Amnesty was working with were not getting the money. And I just remember looking at this person being like, are you for real? Do you not understand what the mission of Amnesty is and what they do? And it was a really important reminder to myself that not everybody understands the role different organizations play. Amnesty International is an organization that campaigns for the protection of human rights. And so when they're campaigning for somebody in a Chinese prison, they're not campaigning and collecting money to give to that person in the Chinese prison. They're campaigning for that person to be released from prison. They're using that money to run their campaigns and put political pressure and whatever it might be to influence decision makers so that these people who are being wrongfully imprisoned or whatever it might be in any part of the world can be released or supported. Like, the work that they're doing is about protecting human rights. It's not a charity that's giving money to like people in need. And so that's an example of why it's so important for these organizations to share stories and make sure that it is clear in their messaging and through their testimony exactly what it is that they do, why it's important, why people in the community support it. Storytelling and testimony is also important because it is something that can contribute to the impact of an organization beyond the direct work that they're doing. Elevating stories into the public sphere can change dominant narratives around different inequalities, different issues, different things that are actually contributing to the very problems that these organizations are working to tackle. It is also important because I think documenting and sharing stories is what contributes to the collective memory of an organization or a social issue. And organizations can preserve these histories of struggle, resilience, achievement that might otherwise be lost. And these narratives often form the very foundations upon which social movements then can begin to unite individuals around these shared values and collective goals. And so in this sense, testimony isn't just about individual voices. It's about weaving those voices into the broader fabric of social transformation. Now we have the fifth T of philanthropy. And this is, of course, treasure or money. I wanted to do this one last because I didn't want to frame this as like the main piece of the philanthropy puzzle and everything else was like a nice to have afterwards. I wanted to show you how all of those other T's, so time, talent, ties, and testimony, are like equally as important as treasure. Now we know that monetary contributions support organizations in pursuing their missions, and philanthropy is broader than finance alone, but financial resources still remain central to enabling or constraining social change and impact. Money doesn't just keep an organization afloat, it provides the foundation for which they can begin to engage with innovation, have more strategic growth, and create longer-term impact. The most immediate role of financial contributions is stability. Without a reliable flow of funding, organizations can't cover their core costs, so things like staff salaries, program delivery, infrastructure and administration, whatever it might be. But funding is often tied to short-term projects. And this leaves a lot of organizations stuck in these kind of cycles of uncertainty. And so flexible financial giving, and what we're talking about here is like unrestricted funds, where somebody gives to an organization and they let the organization choose what they're going to do with that funding, is what really allows organizations to have that stability and be able to plan more strategically, respond to emerging needs, but also invest in sustainable operations. And so treasure should be seen as like the backbone of an organization's resilience. It shouldn't always be the thing that is keeping the organization moving forward. It should be the foundation upon which everything else is built. Financial resources can enable innovation. And we see this so much in the impact investing space, but money is seen as like the thing that allows organizations to push the boundaries because innovation inherently carries risk. Without adequate funding, organizations don't have the ability to test new approaches or invest in more creative solutions. And so they're forced to take slower or less risky seeming approaches. And so philanthropic contributions of treasure can provide a bit of a financial buffer that can allow them to take more risks. And the capacity to innovate then often leads to breakthroughs in service delivery, advocacy, strategies, community engagement models, whatever it might be, that kind of reshape how they then pursue social change. Treasure is also a multiplier effect. It's something that can be like seed funding that then attracts further investment from governments, business, or other donors. A really strategically placed grant can help organizations then scale pilot projects or kind of demonstrate a bit of a proof of concept, which then unlocks more funding opportunities. And so in this sense, financial contributions extend beyond like their immediate monetary value, but they function as a bit of a catalyst for the mobilization of more resources, whether that is time, ties, talent, or other things like in-kind donations. And ultimately, financial contributions do allow organizations to sustain and scale their impact. Without sufficient funding, they can't extend their services to any new communities. They don't have that kind of freedom or flexibility to adapt and evolve the work that they're doing and invest in new things, whether that's data collection methods to demonstrate their impact or improve service delivery, whatever it might be. The financial dimension of philanthropy drives not only immediate relief, but it should be something that can drive further structural transformation within organizations. By resourcing organizations to think and act systematically, money or treasure can really contribute to more durable and far-reaching social change. Treasure, money, also plays a really key role in the philanthropy landscape, but it's not like the be-all and end-all. It's not the only thing. It's one piece of the puzzle, and I think you really need to have all 5 of these within an organization for them to adequately lead their projects and their interventions and have a sustainable, scalable change. So I hope this was a bit of a useful framework for anybody who's listening. Maybe you are a young person who wants to contribute to organizations that align with your values and that you see as doing great work, but maybe you don't have the money that you can donate to them. Now there are other ways that you can contribute to their operations and their mission. Maybe you are somebody who runs an organization or you're a part of an organization and you want to see your organization do better. Rather than emphasizing all of your efforts on getting donations, you might focus on how you can integrate those other 5 T's of philanthropy to tap into people's giving and scale your impact. If you have any questions about this episode, feel free to join us in our Q&A forum on the School of Social Impact. You can ask any questions you have there about any issue related to social change, and I'll be happy to either answer it in the forum or create an entire episode dedicated to answering your question. There's so much to be said about fundraising and the role of finance and money in creating social change. This is just one way of viewing philanthropy, which is an aspect of that broader discussion around financing social change. So I hope you found this interesting, and I would love to hear your feedback, your questions on the School of Social Impact. Thanks for listening to Changemaker Q&A, a production of the Humanitarian Changemakers Network. We'd like to thank our sponsors and partners who make this show possible. Whether you're just starting your change-making journey or looking to fill your change-making toolkit and amplify your impact, head to schoolofsocialimpact.org and check out our free Social Impact Foundations training. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show or have a story to share, you'll find the question submission form and guest expression of interest forms in the show notes. Tiana and the team would like to recognise the traditional owners of the land this podcast was produced on and extend that to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and recognise that sovereignty was never ceded. We extend our respect to all First Nations people globally and acknowledge that our community of changemakers are impacted by colonialism and extractive capitalism in different ways.